So again, welcome everyone to the spring edition of our Longwood Medical Area Research Data Management Working Group Showcase event. Thank you for joining us this morning to explore research data management. So I'm Julie Goldman, Research Data Services Librarian at Countway Library. And on behalf of myself and my co-chair, Jessica Pierce, Research Data Manager with HMS IT Research Computing, we are hosting this showcase today to inform our community on how we are connecting and strengthening research data management for the entire Longwood medical area. Unfortunately, Jessica couldn't join us today, so I will be facilitating today's session. Today, we are going to talk about what research data management is and how our group tackles projects to strengthen research here at Harvard. We will hear from our group members on the projects we are involved in and quick testimonials on why they have joined the LMA RDM WG. The rest of the session will be a facilitated discussion with our members and provide an opportunity for you, the audience, to ask questions. So let's start this showcase with a few definitions. So what is research data and what does the management of it mean? I like this definition from Christine Borgman on the slide because I think it is broad enough to cover, the sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities. As research becomes more interdisciplinary, even biomedical research, this is important to consider. The focus is really on how data are used, particularly as evidence of phenomena for the purposes of research and scholarship. So it's important to think about research, that research takes a lot of different forms, and it can be encoded in many kinds of formats. Another point is that research data are not raw, they're not pure, they're created in a specific context. And data always have a specific social, cultural, and research context that help give it meaning. And we create data in a particular context, and then that data can be reused from a variety of other perspectives and contexts. And when we talk about data being reused, we need to take some steps with our data to ensure that that can actually be possible. So that's the term research data management, which is used to refer to this active and ongoing management of data. Managing data is about knowing that context, who created it, why it was created, and what it's about and where it is. So thinking about that context, evaluating that context is really essential for our effective data management and stewardship. So research data management is all about managing the way data is collected, analyzed, and published for greater reuse by the research community. And we're really all about visualizing the research or data lifecycle. And the lifecycle is a handy way to provide this high-level overview of the stages involved in successful management and preservation of data. So on the slide, you're seeing our newly designed research data lifecycle image. Our vision for this image includes stages for research planning, active research work, and dissemination of research. And including store and manage in the center really emphasizes that data storage concepts must be included at all of the stages in this research process. I want to acknowledge that while this image did have input from our entire working group, the ultimate illustration of the image was completed by Matt Coffey from Healthcare Policy. He focused on accessible color ratios and keeping to Harvard usability standards. So as you will see, this life cycle is integral to our work, including our website and training materials. We have also expanded our life cycle to include the many tools and resources, activities, units that are associated with each stage. And the main takeaway here is that data services are not provided by one unit. Instead, they are provided in complement with other units across the university. So I'll expand our view. So this view is actually a very good representation of our working group members. We come from units across the university and have diverse subject and domain knowledge. So this is the main reason why I joined the working group when I started my data services position at Countway Library. I was tasked to create some data services offerings through the library. However, I realized data management is a very collaborative effort, and I rely on a network of professionals to work with. So luckily, this group does just that. It brings together key stakeholders in the research community every month to coordinate efforts across the university and solve problems we see our researchers facing. This network has really helped me understand the needs of our community and where the Countway Library fits into this life cycle of data services available to the Longwood area. I believe all of our members benefit from being involved in the group because we make relevant services and resources visible to the people who need them, thus strengthening management of research data. So I look forward to hearing why my fellow colleagues have joined the group. So let me next talk about this group. So here on the Longwood campus, we are very fortunate to have this amazing network of people and groups that are all invested in data management practices and solving these problems. The group started in 2015 as the HMS Data Management Working Group, but it has grown to include members of the School of Public Health and hospital affiliates. In order to reflect and include the members that come to our meetings and are involved in our project work, we recently went through this name change to the Longwood Medical Area Research Data Management Working Group. We want to remain, this grassroots effort across the campus because we feel this helps build an inclusive committee and focus on real work that will help our research community. Who usually are connected to many different schools or departments. So our overall mission is to develop recommended practices to meet current and anticipate future research data management needs of researchers across the LMA. So our working group meets monthly. And these are open meetings to anyone in the community. We use these meetings to find out about data management efforts, both at LMA and Harvard levels, report on our subgroup project work, and then it's a real forum for discussion. We occasionally bring in members of the community to guest speak and present on relevant topics. The group has formed several subgroups that each work on individual projects and report back to our larger LMA RDM WG on this monthly basis. So the creation of these subgroups really allows for projects to be worked on in parallel and allows for our group to grow the research data management presence on the Harvard campus to extend our footprint on and off quad. So we have multiple groups working on distinct projects and topics, and today we have representatives from each of the subgroups, and they will share some recent updates from each of these groups. But please see our website for full project statements and yearly goals. So for the data management plans subgroup, we have Melissa Korf, Director of Grants and Contracts Administration from the HMS Office of Research Administration. For our electronic lab notebooks, Kathleen Keating, Research Computing Consultant with HMS RC. From our website subgroup, we have Sarah Hauserman, Research Data Management Analyst, also with HMS Research Computing. From our outreach and training subgroup, we have Dan Wingstock, Director of Research Integrity with HMS Academic and Research Integrity. And then finally, from our research workflows and metadata subgroup, we have Carolyn Chamu, Associate Dean for Research Course and Technology. I realize I have your old title here, Carolyn, so you can update yourself when you speak. Awesome. So first, I'm going to invite Melissa to talk about the data management plan subgroup.
Hi, everyone. Like Julie said, my name is Melissa Korf. I'm the Director for Grants and Contracts in ORA. And research data management is near and dear to our hearts in ORA because we have the pleasure of working on all of the data use agreements for Harvard Medical School and the School of Dental Medicine. So it's anytime you're obtaining data from a third-party source and need to sign an agreement, ORA can help with that. Or anytime that you have sensitive data that you need to share with a collaborator, ORA can help get an agreement in place to make sure that that data is treated appropriately. But also, we see this proliferation of data management and sharing requirements from our sponsors. So most notably, if you haven't heard about it already, NIH has come out with their final data management and sharing policy, which will go into effect in January 2023. And as far away as January 2023 may seem right now, it's really, really close for the sort of potentially large cultural shift we need to make to be able to write and comply with these data management and sharing plans and really adopt a culture of data management and sharing. And so in moving forward with the work of our data management plan subgroup, we've been really thinking about how we can help reduce the burden associated with that cultural shift. How can we prepare resources that will enable our community to start thinking more about data management and sharing planning, from the very beginning of conceiving of a project? How can we streamline this process, provide better templates, provide better resources? And our number one goal currently, or project currently, is adding some tailoring to a template on DMP tool. So DMP tool is a great resource generally for any type of data management and sharing plan. They have a lot of great templates that are sponsor specific. Not one necessarily yet for this new NIH policy, since it's still a relatively new development. But what we decided to do is take one of those templates and leverage some of the functionality in DMP tool to add some example text, as well as links to Harvard-specific resources. So, if you're dealing with issues of data ownership, can we provide some, standard language that's reflective of Harvard policy, or point to policies that might help inform your planning? Can we point to specific resources if you're, collecting data from human subjects and need to be able to plan for how you're going to be able to share that data for secondary research when the project is over, and things of that nature. So we are in the final stages of vetting that resource and hope to be able to publish that soon. In addition to that, we're also working, some of us are working with a university-wide group to provide more university-wide resources via a template that would be across all of Harvard. So some great work in this space by my colleagues, and I think that's one of the reasons that this working group is so great is that, as Julie mentioned, we bring together all of these various perspectives, because as we're going through the data management plan, we're realizing that different offices are best utilized or best positioned to support very different aspects. Research computing is best able maybe to support deciding on the best method of collection and the best format to collect your data and store your data, whereas you might need to reach out to ORA or IRB if you're thinking through, well, what are the ethical considerations? What agreements am I going to need to have in place if I'm going to share data? How do I need to comply with my sponsor's requirements? So it's a great collaborative effort across all of the stakeholders. And I
Awesome.
think, okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melissa. So next up is Dan to speak about outreach and training subgroup.
Hi, I'm Dan Wainstock. I'm the Director for Research Integrity at HMS. When I first joined HMS and took this role out of an interest in research reproducibility and research integrity, it quickly became clear to me that neither of those goals, reproducibility or basic integrity of data, can really be reached without input from lots of different stakeholders. And that was what drew me to this working group, because it really is all of us pulling together to make sure that there's an infrastructure available to you, to researchers, that will give you the tools and the approaches that'll make it easier to track your data and keep it intact, keep it labeled in a way that you know what it is, so that then when the time comes to publish it, you are confident in it and it is reproducible. So that was my perspective on coming to this group. I'm just going to quickly, because the slide pretty much does a better job than I can in summarizing all the amazing offerings, most of which are coordinated by Julie out of Countway. But some of you, I think, were actually in the RCR session, the Responsible Conduct Research session that we had yesterday. So that's one element of the way that we do outreach and training. But there's a lot more that is more specific and more targeted, which, as I said, a lot of that's run out of Countway. Although for specific topics like bioinformatics, the bioinformatics core out of the Chan School does a tremendous job as well. And there are plenty of other folks represented here, research computing and elsewhere, who are doing a lot of these kinds of sessions, talking about different ways of thinking about research data management and different tools that are available to help support it. And then the last thing that I want to mention is the newsletter that this group puts out. Well, not the subgroup necessarily, but the working group as a whole. And you may have, I don't know how many of you got the newsletter just a few days ago. Selfishly, I'll mention that our office is hiring. So if you're interested in data management and you got the newsletter or not, but you're interested in approaching data management and investigating data in a different way, please do feel free to email me, and I'm happy to tell you more about the position that's available. At any rate, the newsletter does go out quarterly. It just went out, so there won't be another one for a little while. But if you want to sign up, I believe the link is there. And the newsletter collects information from all around HMS and beyond. And consistent with the fact that there are stakeholders from so many different groups, from so many different departments, from so many different offices, it's often, it would otherwise be hard, I think, to find that information. And so the fact that it's aggregated into this newsletter, I think, can be quite helpful. So I hope that's helpful to you. If you have specific questions about sessions that are available, whether it's how to use O2 or then again, any of us are happy to point you in the right direction. Again, since this is such a collaboration between research computing and the libraries and the rest of us.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Dan. So now I'd like to ask Carolyn to talk about the research workflows and metadata subgroup.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Chamu. I'm Associate Dean for Research Cores and Technologies, and I became, sorry, a little notification on my thing. I became interested in and participated in, this is sort of one of the early members of the data management working group, not only because of my own research interests that involve sharing high throughput screening data and data from sort of large functional genomic studies, but also because of my role helping to oversee and coordinate the research cores at Harvard Medical School, where many large data sets are created, right? Whether it's at the sequencing cores or in the microscopy and imaging facilities. So I've known for a long time how important it is to share data. And I also know from a practical point of view how important it is when you're leaving a lab to leave a good record of the data and annotated that you've left behind so that it is usable, findable by your PI and your colleagues that you who remain in the lab and might use your data in the future. So we have a very big project that's gone on actually for more than a year now in this subgroup on research workflows and metadata, where we developed first these onboarding and offboarding checklists that can be used as you join a lab, as you start a project, and then as you leave a lab, in order to sort of get an overall sense of what do I need to think about as I start in the lab in terms of potentially data standards that might be used, locations that data should be stored, how to set up collaborative folders or files so that I can work with my colleagues efficiently and share with my collaborators. And then as I leave the lab, where do my files go? Who still has access after I leave and no longer have access to Harvard Medical School files? What can I take with me, as a copy? And what data should I deposit perhaps in a public repository, right? To share more broadly. So we developed these checklists that you can see they're pictured here that are available from the RDM, the Data Management Working Group website. And these are sort of high level checklists at the moment, sort of that just guide you, questions to ask, things that you should discuss with your PI as you start in the lab and leave the lab. We've also developed, in the sort of final stages of developing the first version of a knowledge transfer file that we're just beginning to roll out hopefully this summer, which is it's a more specific worksheet, I guess, to be used when you leave the lab to record potentially all aspects of the data that you have generated while you're there, in particular recording where raw data are and key research files relevant to figures published in papers or your thesis. And it also provides a template for recording information about data that are unpublished, that are left behind, right, that are potentially usable by other members of the lab after you leave. And so at the moment, we're focusing on the knowledge transfer file to figure out sort of whether individual HMS departments or labs might find a more customizable or slimmed down version more useful. And so we're seeking input from the community. So something that would be really helpful, especially for those of you who talked about building your own systems that you're working on that right now, maybe in your lab or for your own personal work. If you'd be willing to meet with me and Jessica Pierce, please let me know by email or just put your name in the chat and we'll record it. You can also let Julie know because we're at the moment now where we're taking input and feedback on the knowledge transfer file. We want it to be usable and very helpful, not as a tool that sort of facilitates recording this information. So thanks very much.
Great, thanks so much, Carolyn. So now I'll ask Kathleen to share some details of the ELM subgroup. Thanks, Kathleen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kathleen Keating. I'm a consultant within research computing, which is part of HMS IT. And I joined the data management working group for a number of reasons. And I really, what others have said has resonated with me. It's a combination of both personal and professional interests. I do enjoy, documentation and data reproducibility. I think it's important to be able to not only do your scientific work, but to be able to have others reuse and understand what you did. And in addition, within my consultant role at Research Computing, it doesn't make sense to try to just exist in a vacuum trying to help researchers with their computational work. It's better to have a big picture of, data management, the data lifecycle, what resources are available for training, onboarding, offboarding, and whatnot. So today I'm speaking on behalf of the ELN, or Electronic Lab Notebooks group, subgroup. And we focus on digital record keeping methods. And several of our members have already spoken today, such as Dan and Julie. And the focus of our group is shifted a bit from our historical work to what we're focusing on now. Previously, there was not one centralized ELN or multiple ELNs being offered at HMS or at Harvard. So it made it difficult for researchers to be able to identify a tool to use to document their work, or even be aware that you can electronically document your work. So previously we were focused on, gathering information in terms of what ELN tools are available, what are the pros and cons of each of them, as well as what are researchers using to actively document their work at HMS. We did have a resource available called the ELN Matrix. And this was available to just, summarize and highlight different ELN tools. As we move forward at both HMS and Harvard of having ELN pilots, it makes sense to decommission this resource. Because we have resources available if people want to leverage one or both of these tools. So at HMS directly, we have a tool called eLab Journal. They recently rebranded this past week to eLab Next. And through Harvard University IT, the RSpace ELN is available. Both of these tools are really good choices if you want to, document your own work as well as work collaboratively with others. There's a journaling component to both of them, as well as an inventory component. In terms of eLab, it is very much more structured, and it's sort of a more rigid format. Within the journaling part, you have a hierarchy of projects, studies, and experiments. RSpace is definitely less structured. You have more flexibility to be able to document your work, just create documents as needed or upload attachments. In terms of eligibility for these tools, for eLab Journal, in our pilot phase, it is available for HMS on-quad labs, departments, and approved HMS cores. We do not have a cost associated with this. For RSpace, it is Harvard-wide, and there is a fee associated with this. And if you are interested in using either of these tools, please use the emails that are listed at the bottom here, and reach out for more information. And I'd also love to hear from anyone who's on the call. If you are currently using an ELN, or you're interested in getting started with one. And with that, I'd like to say thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathleen. So lastly, I'll introduce Sarah to talk about our website subgroup.
Thanks, Julie. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Hauserman. I'm a member of the Research Data Management team, along with Jessica Pierce, within HMS IT Research Computing. And I'm here to talk about the final subgroup, which updates and maintains the content and structure of the Harvard Biomedical Research Data Management website. So the subgroup is really tasked with reviewing, maintaining, and expanding the website that was originally created as a central location for sharing information about best practices and resources across the LMA community, but also the greater Harvard community. Our subgroup aims to keep the website relevant with upcoming trainings and news articles, while also overseeing larger projects to help develop new content. In 2019, our subgroup conducted user testing to help improve the usability and aesthetics of the site. And using the feedback that was provided by the website users, as well as shared expertise from our subgroup members, we actually redesigned the site and migrated to a new platform beginning in 2020. So this full usability report that we generated has now been published and is available for viewing on our website if you're interested to learn about the usability testing that we did. During the redesign process, we collaborated with the HMS web development team to re-envision the research data lifecycle image, which Julie highlighted earlier in the presentation. We wanted the lifecycle image to become more interactive, so researchers could actually click on a particular section of the image and be taken to various stages of the data lifecycle, which corresponded to different pages on the website. And it was a really big undertaking and we're quite proud of it. So please do take a look at our website homepage and utilize that lifecycle image. So some of our future goals for 2021, we'd like to include more original content and some of those resources that Carolyn highlighted, including the knowledge transfer file template, and also any future iterations of the onboarding and offboarding documents. Also, as Melissa Korf mentioned, we're hoping to publish a template of the DMP tool that will be HMS specific. So all of those resources are coming out this year and we're hoping to highlight those on the website. We're also hoping to expand some of our media presence. We are recording this session, as Julie mentioned, and we're hoping to include more recorded Zoom sessions so that if you're unable to attend due to the large amount of Zoom meetings or sessions that are now available, you'll be able to go on the website and actually just view it on your own time. We also hope to do some additional user testing now that we've migrated to a new platform. So it will inform us how this migration has impacted usability and hope to refine the overall design to improve the experience. So please visit the website and submit any feedback to our subgroup. There is a bit.ly link here in the presentation. So once that gets sent out, feel free to click on that. We also have a contact us form at the bottom of the website that you can access anytime. So feel free to provide any feedback you have on the lifecycle image, on the overall website, on some of our training resources. We're excited to update the website over the next year and make it more usable. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. So today we also have an active member of the group. She's a member of our outreach and training subgroup. So I want to invite Mita Mistry, senior trainer and analyst research scientist with the Harvard Chan Bioinformatics Corps, to share her thoughts on why she's a member of our subgroup, of our group.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks for that introduction. So yeah, my name is Mita Mistry. I am an analyst and trainer at the Chan Bioinformatics Corps, and I actually joined the working group in 2017. And initially, I had joined to gain an awareness of data management tools and the different strategies. That given that my day-to-day involves working with researchers across Harvard to help them analyze their data, but also to work to train researchers on how to work with their own data. And so as part of the working group, I'm continually learning about new resources, new strategies, and able to disseminate that back to the community, to the researchers that we collaborate with. In our workshops, we teach different bioinformatics workshops where we talk about the different workflows for next generation sequencing data. And we make a point to emphasize the importance of data management practices and, how critical that is as part of the analysis workflow, before you actually jump into that. So really getting that information out to the community. As a working group member, I've also been able to contribute back. As Julie mentioned, I'm part of the outreach and training subgroup. So, bringing to the table any issues that we deal with at the core, but also to help, come up with different solutions to problems that exist. And just finally working with the group is just it's just a really great community to be part of, and it also provides an opportunity to meet and network with a lot of awesome people in the Longwood medical area.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mita. Okay, so thanks to our representatives and members for sharing their work and some initial perspectives on joining the RDMWG. Before we jump into our panel discussion, we want to switch gears and hear from the audience. So far we have shared lots of tools and resources that are available to help you manage your data and develop research data management practices for your projects. So we're really wondering, what are the barriers to entry to using maybe some of the tools and resources that we presented today? So we want to hear from you. This might relate to why you joined today's session, but there are lots of resources that we're providing. So yeah, share your thoughts, and this will help lead our discussion with our panelists. So I'll give you another minute or two to respond, and you can select as many of these issues that you see. Great, another couple of seconds. We're getting some really great feedback here. Awesome, thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts. So we can see that a lot of you are lacking the time and the people, also lack of guidance and unclear expectations. So this is really interesting. And then thank you for some other options or other ideas that you've put into the chat. Great. So I think some of our panelists may be able to share some thoughts regarding these. Sorry, I meant to share these results with the audience so you can see some of the top answers. Great. Awesome. So let's jump into our panel discussion. And I'll show these questions and for our panelists. So we also encourage, audience members to ask your own questions in the chat, and we'll get to those if we have time. And since we are recording, feel free to chat us privately, and I will ask any questions anonymously. This is your opportunity to learn about RDM and the work of our group and available, data support services. All right, so our first question, what are the major data management challenges you see with the researchers and the students that you support? So I'm kind of leaving that open to anyone who wants to jump in first.
Right. Well, I'm happy to start.
Okay.
That's right. So, being in working in a lab for many years, and some of the participants, pointed this out, the time that it takes, and the sort of the lack of reward, at least in, previous years, because there were very few incentives to do it and very few requirements absolutely to do it. It was more just like, I feel that I should do this. It's helpful, but I'm not really getting, sort of credit, from my PI even sometimes, or my colleagues for investing the time to annotate data, right? And make sure that it's shared properly, for example. But I think those things are changing, and even in grants now, often there's funding included, acknowledging the importance of organizing data, annotating data, and sharing it.
So I guess I can
sort
go.
of to add. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, sort of to add to the time issue, there's also a money issue. So I think when everyone was joining and adding in like why they're here, I think someone mentioned I was just appointed the data manager for the lab, and I wonder how much of that is a paid a paid endeavor, or a voluntold opportunity to take on research data management for the lab. And there's not a lot of resources, or when you look at an NIH grant where the modular cap hasn't increased from $250,000 in 20 years, and the normal the detailed cap hasn't increased from $500,000 in equal amount of time. There isn't a lot of resources to say, I'm going to hire someone to focus just on data management, just making sure that we've got proper protocols in place, and we're using the knowledge transfer file, and taking care of some of those things that, to Carolyn's point, may not seem rewarding in the moment to the researcher who just needs to get their paper done, but are really important to the long-term management of the lab and the data. And so it's financial resources to pay for the time that's necessary to really do this well.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. As part of my job, I do a lot of direct outreach with researchers, postdocs, graduate students, and I meet with them on a one-on-one basis. And I've noticed that a lot of the times, like Julie was saying, the context is lost from the data sets, and it becomes difficult for researchers to really understand where the data was created, how it was created, when it was created. Some of these basic metadata elements are lost over time, and that makes it really difficult for the data to be shared on a long-term basis. And also, I believe offboarding really is a big issue across the campus, which is why we created the offboarding checklist, because we found that PIs, lab members will leave the data there and nobody can access it. Nobody knows, the right protocols to get into the data, and it's no longer shareable. So I think these are some of the big challenges that I've seen when I'm interacting with researchers. And like Melissa was saying, a lot of these members are just being nominated as a lab data manager. They actually might not have previous knowledge about what data management means, and they're kind of just picking it up because they were nominated by their PI. And so I think a lot of these resources are really important to disseminate across the LMA at HMS, because I think these resources will make some of these data managers' jobs easier because they'll have foundations to begin with.
I would just add that I think a lot of these factors conspire together. I mean, so one of the things that came up in the poll was lack of guidance or unclear expectations. And I think sometimes that's a direct result of the fact that there isn't somebody who has time to really sort out, okay, what would be the best practice for our lab? How do we want to organize this? Where do we want to store everything? And so the lack of people power definitely contributes to not having the time to establish a best practice, which then in turn leads to things that I've seen, like people not only not being able to access data or interpret data, but not even be able to find data, because there are all these different places where it could be stored. It could be stored on a shared server. It could be stored on an external hard drive. It could be stored on a personal laptop. And sometimes folks back stuff up to multiple of those resources, and sometimes they don't. And when there's no, and when there's no central person thinking about best practices or establishing clear expectations, then the topic just doesn't come up.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, I mean, the school realizes, right, that the faculty do play a very important role. And I think, you're realizing, the participants in this meeting too, that the faculty they're so busy, doing so many other things that in the absence of requirements or incentives, it's also been maybe a lower priority for them. And so, right, we're trying to help create some of these tools and also, work with the faculty, to make them aware of responsibilities in this context. Yeah.
Yeah, and when time is at such a premium, whether it's the PI's time or a data manager's time or anything else, we figure the more we can lower the activation energy barrier and so that it takes less time, the more likely it is that people will do what they already know they want to do.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So feedback from the community on the tools we're developing to really make sure that they're very usable and that they are facilitating things as opposed to just being another barrier will be incredibly helpful going forward.
And I think, like you were saying, Dan, I think by setting up some of these workflows and some of these standards within labs at the beginning, when a PI is coming on or when new members are coming on, it's a much easier lift than having to go back retroactively and try and fix some of the errors that have occurred for years. That takes a lot of time, a lot of people, resources, and it's really difficult. So, we're trying to incentivize people to start these processes at the beginning to really make their lives easier, and they don't have to do a lot of this heavy lift at the end.
Great. So I'll ask, the second question, which really gets into this costs and consequences of the gaps in data management that you see. You've all kind of already mentioned some of these, you can't find data, can't understand data, but are there other kind of, more specific costs and consequences that any of you have seen? Carolyn?
Yeah. Again, I can jump in. I mean, certainly, there's a time cost too when you can't find a data set that's actually key, to take the next step in a research project or to share with a new collaborator, right? It can be embarrassing that you can't find data that was produced by your own lab. And it can take a lot of time then to sort out, like, where is it? How do I access it? And then actually, what is the structure of the data, right? If it's not left well annotated. So there's a big cost as well, potentially, for not organizing your data. I think, that's a good place to start.
I'll also add to that some of the ethical considerations, right? So, one of the reasons that NIH really wants to encourage and support data management and sharing, importantly, the sharing piece is, the human subject component, right? If a human puts forward their time, potentially takes a risk to participate in a study, we want to absolutely maximize as much as possible the benefit obtained from that contribution. And so, if you take up a human subject's time or, animal subjects research, you use an animal subject, we want to get, the biggest bang for that buck, so to speak. And so, having to redo a study with those subjects because the data was lost is the last thing anyone wants to see from an ethical perspective.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's really a detriment to science as a whole if some of this data is lost or is not being shared with the rest of the community. If it's not reproducible, it just seems like a waste to not have that data available for other uses. So I think it is a detriment to your lab and you as a researcher, but also science as a whole.
I don't want to get morbid, but in the worst case scenario, if there's some kind of discrepancy that comes up in a published paper and someone has some questions about how the work was done, it's one of the parts of my job is to go in and find the data that underlie that paper and do an independent analysis so that faculty can determine whether there was a problem or whether there wasn't a problem. And when the data aren't there, or when the data aren't adequately curated or preserved, then it can be very hard for people to provide an explanation for, the discrepancy that was identified. So that's a super rare scenario. So I don't want to dwell on it, but it's also protective to be able to say, look, here it all is. Here's what I did, and to be able to fully support the important work that you've already done.
Great, thank you all. So our third question really, is about what are some of the things you can do to help mitigate the above, but I think you've already all kind of covered that with, sharing these practices and getting these resources out there. I do want to turn to some participant questions that we're seeing in the chat, because I think these are really great questions. So the first one, how much consistency do you see or desire? Sorry, let me read that again. How much consistency do you see or a push for across groups in similar fields? There are so many tools and resources out there. Has our group found particular solutions to be far superior to others? Or is the biggest barrier simply, encouraging this implementation and compliance? Any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I'd say we're sort of at, the early stages of this, and there's just a lot of work across different NIH programs and in different communities to sort of try for themselves, different things and to see what works. There are many data standards that are being developed at NIH, but there's still many data types for which there aren't standards, for which a lot of work needs to be done. So I think we're at an experimental. There are lots of options, but I think that to work with your lab group in particular to think what might work for you, and to reference the resources that we provide on the website, for example, to begin to get information if you're uncertain of where to start. So even for the ELNs, I think is a great example here, right? David Corey's group in neurobiology felt very strongly about adopting one for his own lab, and over the last year, he worked with Kathleen, group in research computing to help pilot, to sort of just demo effectively, and sort of enlist and learn about, sort of about 8 options, and then they chose one, this eLab notebooks, to actually start to pilot, and that's been now implemented for about maybe 4 months or 6 months. And they're really just working as a whole lab to figure out what works best for them. So it does take a little experimenting and trying and communication with your group. And so I think that is where we are right now. There aren't a ton of established answers, and it's a challenge because there's so many, they're just diverse research interests across the quad, even, right? Let alone like talking about the French department, right? Or the the School of Design, on the other side of the river. That there's really no one size fits all. It's very dependent on the scientific area, what other tools are available in your discipline, and just the practices in your own lab, what works best for how your PI sort of oversees data and wants to be involved.
So just to jump off a little bit from what Carolyn said, and I did sort of type something to this effect in the chat. There are fields for which standards don't exist yet, and they're still in this experimental phase. And we see like NIH-wide data management and sharing policy is vague for this reason, to allow those fields the flexibility they need to arrive at works the best for that field. But I'll just add to that then it's important for the field to come to those standards and conclusions. Because if they don't, then agencies will do it for them. So we see with like NIMH funded research, they say if you're using human subjects and you are funded by NIMH, you will use this standard. You will deposit in this repository, right? They're very prescriptive. And the last thing we want is for an agency to dictate because the field hasn't done it themselves, because of course, the best people to set those standards and drive towards that consistency are the experts in the field.
Thanks so much, Melissa. I also, just being aware of the time, I do want to answer this other question that came in from an audience member on the PI's duty. So it seems to me that a new PI might be best positioned to implement some of these practices most easily when starting up a lab rather than trying to phase it in later. Is that your sense too? What considerations should a new PI keep in mind when balancing these needs versus other startup requirements? Any thoughts on this question?
Again, I think I agree. It's great to start when you start a lab, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible to phase in later, right? Like witness David Corey's group. He's a rather senior faculty member, and I think he's doing a great job of implementing standards, starting to go forward, not necessarily trying to organize everything historically. But yeah, definitely new PIs. That's absolutely wonderful. And a good place to start would be to talk to your previous PI, your postdoctoral PI, and then maybe get advice, from them or your graduate advisor. And then in your new department, talk to your colleagues there. Although, there isn't broad, data organ management, sort of adopted across, the quad in all labs uniformly. There in every single department, there are a few people who are thinking about it deeply. And that's a great conversation starter to talk to your new colleagues and figure out what's worked for them. And then maybe you can begin to develop some departmental standards in addition to individual lab standards. So that's great. That's a wonderful thing to ask.
I just want to add that in terms of lowering the activation energy barrier, it's to adoption of these kinds of things. It's worth thinking about what tools and resources are supported by research computing, because that will definitely make it easier as well. So that's sort of a pragmatic consideration rather than a theoretical or field specific one, but it's worth thinking about.
And I know we're running out of time, but I would just also add that there are some best practices that are really easy to implement, like file organization, file naming, some of these things that seem relatively easy to implement, but they make a huge difference in how the data is organized and maintained. So some of those things can be implemented at the start that don't require a lot of effort. But like Carolyn said, you can always add more tools and resources later on in your career. And change up the workflows, but at least starting at the beginning, you can implement some of these basic best practices.
Yeah, and I think to have regular discussions with the members of your group as they enter the lab, and even perhaps regularly every once a month or every briefly at many group meetings about these things and how people are managing data. All the members of a new PI's lab, all the members of any PI's lab should be sharing their data with the PI. It's a big problem has occurred when data are not shared with PIs or other people in the lab. It then becomes very difficult to access.
Great, thank you all so much. So just to wrap up, that concludes our spring LMA RDMWG Data Management Showcase. I'm sure we could have this conversation all day long, but if you are interested in learning more about research data management and getting involved, please come to our monthly open meetings. These generally are on the first Thursday of the month. Again, they're open, everyone is welcome. We continue to meet virtually. So if you are interested in joining us, please just send us a note and we'll send you the meeting invite. So thank you all again for joining. We look forward to connecting with you all.